What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the March 2019 format. Now this past weekend brought to a close the first ever Team YCS, which is a 3v3 format, and this was absolutely monumental. A lot of people had fun, and although I wasn't able to attend myself, a lot went down and there is a lot to discuss moving forward in this upcoming format. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you really love the meta-analysis or any of the other content that I produce on this channel, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to people like Brandon and Triet that I'm able to bring you this content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So to kick things off, I want to go ahead and briefly explain how a 3v3 tournament works. Typically, when you play at a tournament of pretty much any other type, it's going to be one-on-one best 2 out of 3. Well, that rule still applies, except rather than it just being yourself, you have a team of 3 players. Now, each of you has a designated letter A, B, or C. And when you sit across from the opposing team, player A is going to face player A, player B against player B, and player C against player C. Now, the positioning of where you decide you want to be with the rest of your team is very important, which I'll get to a little bit later on. And the reason for that is because you can actually communicate with each other during the match. And this is cool because maybe you get to a certain decision tree where you're not sure what to do, there's multiple angles of attack, you can ask one of your teammates for help. But depending on your placement, you can only communicate with specific players. Now, the thing is, when it comes to this, you are going to play a best 2 out of 3 with your opponent, but collectively as a team, you have to win 2 out of your 3 matches in order to go 1-0 for that round. And then it pretty much plays out like any other large style YCS, regional, anything like that would. Now, the thing is, when it comes to your placement, A can talk with B and B can talk with C, but player A cannot talk with player C. So you want to probably have your best player be in the middle so they can communicate with both players, or let's say 2 of you are playing the exact same deck, you're probably going to want to sit next to each other just because your decks are so similar, you might have the best knowledge about them. And then if the third player is playing something completely different, they can be by themselves, but you still want to have the most knowledgeable player, preferably sitting in the middle. So that's a quick rundown on how it works. Apparently the reception for this was incredible. I think a lot of people really liked it, and we'll have to see if Konami decides to do one of these events again in the future. So getting on to the good stuff, here is the top 16 breakdown for YCS Atlanta. Now the thing you have to keep in mind is, even though this is top 16, each team is comprised of 3 players, which means this is actually a pie chart breakdown of 48 different decks that managed to make the top cut. And it really shouldn't come as a surprise here, because we kind of already knew that these were the top decks. I mean, Sky Striker, Salamangreat, Danger, Thunder Dragon, I discussed all of these in my top 5 meta decks for the March 2019 format. So if you guys want to check out that video, I'd highly recommend it. And I'm not really going to dwell too much on why these decks are as good as they are, because I feel like I've kind of covered those points more in depth up to this point. But what I'd rather do in this video is discuss some of the trends that these decks are now taking on, and kind of some new evolutions in these decks' life cycle, because this is probably the last major event for, until we have the ban list coming up. I think there's a UDS coming up a little bit soon in Medellin, so that's something to consider as well, but that's not going to be nearly as large in comparison to something like this 3v3 YCS. So to kick things off, Sky Striker was the most represented deck at, I believe, 38%, so I think it's like 18 Sky Striker out of the 48 managed to make the top cut. And again, Sky Striker has proven itself by winning multiple YCSs. It's been able to just show that it is one of the most consistent decks and can go the distance in these long-term events. And honestly, it's well deserving of the fact that I believe 2 of the 3 players at least on the team that ended up winning the event were playing Sky Striker, so that's pretty awesome. And also too, shout outs to them because they are from South America, and I think it's pretty cool. They did not have a lot of representation from South America coming to this YCS, and they managed to win. So big shout outs to them, congrats to you. The thing is though, with Sky Striker, there are a couple new evolutions now that the meta has gotten a little bit more defined. One is the fact that some players are opting to go for triple multi-roll. Triple multi-roll is actually pretty significant because going up against the Salamangreat matchup, which is more than likely going to be a matchup you're going to encounter very often, by having that multi-roll, if your opponent who is playing Salamangreat allows that multi-roll to resolve, it's going to shut down any form of disruption in the form of their hand traps or in the form of like their roar or anything like that. So multi-roll actually has a much bigger role to play now than it did before, so accessing the card a lot more freely or being able to draw it without searching it with an engage or something like that is starting to become a lot more prevalent. So people are having to force negate it with their roar or just whatever card possible, and that might be one of the reasons why Sky Striker started to see a little bit more success at this event compared to previous events where Salamangreat did see a much higher representation in comparison and was in the first place spot compared to second. Another trend we've been seeing is an uptick in Jamming Wave. Jamming Wave going now to 1, sometimes even 2 copies in some instances, just to again force out that Salamangreat back row to ensure that Sky Striker is able to play. So there's a lot of really cool interactions here, and again, it just really completely depends on your deck building process or what you think makes sense, but these are just the trends I'm wanting to inform you about just to show why Sky Striker is starting to see more success in comparison to some of the other strategies. But next up we have Salamangreat, which took 16 of the top 48 slots, a nice clean 33%, and Salamangreat hasn't really seen too much evolution. There is still some debate as to what the superior build is. Some players are still opting to go for the artifact build just because artifact scythe is an absolute blowout against the entire metagame for the most part. We've got people still kind of debating between Lady Debug and Flame Buffalo on which is the better starter. We've seen some players actually play both in maximum copies just because they want to have as many starter cards as possible, so that's another route you can decide to take with that deck if you so wish. We also saw the inclusion of Crusadia Reclusia, which is a nice interesting card. It's fire, it's level 3, it allows you to pop cards, which is pretty neat. There's a lot of kind of neat interactions, especially like in the mirror match in combination with a card like Hita that you can do with Crusadia Reclusia, so that's another card you might want to look into if you are a Salamangreat player. But ultimately, Salamangreat hasn't changed a whole lot from what we've seen in the past. The deck lists are still looking fairly standard. Some people are actually upping Will of the Salamangreat to 2 copies just because it's an incredible extender. A lot of the times where you think your opponent might have a way to out your board, if you have a Will of the Salamangreat, it kind of just outs any sort of disruption they may have, so that might be a reason why players are upping it to 2. Just a really solid card. It is only once per turn, but honestly, it's a very powerful extender, especially if you can resolve it for its Soul Charge-esque effect. It's really, really nice, and honestly, Salamangreat is going to continue being one of the strongest decks of the current format until we get a ban list, but even then, I think Salamangreat's not even going to get touched, primarily because of the fact it's so relatively new, and it's honestly not that unfair. It kind of just does the same thing over and over again very well. That doesn't mean it isn't good, it's just not really unfair, if that makes sense. But speaking of unfair, the third most represented deck from YCS Atlanta was Danger Thunder Dragon. Now, there were a couple of like Chaos Thunder Dragon kind of just thrown into this as well, but Danger Thunder Dragon was the primary deck in this instance. But there were a lot of innovations here, and that's what I'm really excited to discuss, one of which is the prize card for this year, Chaos Armageddon Dragon, or whatever the prize card variant of Chaos Emperor Dragon is. And man, this card just takes the deck to an entirely new level. We saw this very briefly at the beginning of the when Thunder Dragons were released back in Soul Fusion, but we didn't really see it much since then. But now it's starting to make a comeback because now we have the new Guard Dragon Danger component to it as well, and this is kind of just enabling the deck to do some combos it wasn't able to previously do, and some of these combos are just absolutely absurd, allowing you to go into stuff like Dark Matter Dragon, which is just like another extender. It's also 4,000 attack, it can attack twice, like it just puts so much firepower onto the board, it's just insane. And another innovation here is also the introduction of a Morphage Goliath. This is something the deck wasn't previously playing, but it's a really nice inclusion because you can just do this crazy combo with all the Guard Dragons to like get a Morphage Goliath to your hand and then like summon it, and then your opponent's not going to be able to special summon, and it's just a really, really sick, disgusting lock. And it's stuff that we've like already seen the deck do before, but now it's just like even worse because now it has like multiple negations backing with like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss and all these other crazy things. The deck is extremely, extremely powerful, and a lot of the top players at this YCS were piloting this deck, and it made it all the way to the finals, but just got eked out once again by Sky Strikers. The deck is still incredibly powerful and is still, in my opinion, the third best deck of the format. It's got such an insanely high ceiling. It just has the the fact that it just crumbles under its own weight at times. It can be disrupted at certain points that can just kind of end its turn, but ultimately it's still an extremely powerful deck, and it's one of the most viable decks at that. So if you like combo decks that can just go off and break your opponent's board with ease, Danger Thunder Dragon might be the deck for you. Just to quickly touch on a couple of other things though, the other decks that topped, I believe there was a Danger Orcust and a Trickstar, which I will have both of those deck profiles coming up on my channel as well, because Project CCG did make the top 8 with those deck profiles, my good friends, so be sure to stick around for those. There was also a Danger Hero deck, which I'm very curious to see. I don't think the profile's out for that at the time of making this video anyway, and then there was also a Pendulum Magician in there as well, just still being able to sneak in as one of those rogue decks that's able to compete with the big three. Pendulum Magician is something you definitely still want to keep your eyes on. In terms of the side decks are looking pretty similar. Evenly Matched is actually kind of on its way out just because it's not really good against the particular metagame. Summon Limit is still starting to see a huge surge in popularity. Sky Striker was actually maining it in a lot of instances because it's pretty good against your Salamangreat matchup, your Danger matchup, and even in the Mirror match, if they just go Ray into their Hayate, they can't go into Kagari or Shizuku, and that stops a lot of their advantage engine. So Summon Limit is still something you have to look out for, so be sure you got your Twin Twisters, your Red Reboots, your Pankratops, anything to make sure you don't get locked under that card. But ultimately, this is how the format's probably going to look for the next few weeks until we get that ban list around the beginning of April, which is when it's supposed to come out. I'm really curious to see what happens, and I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this format as well. So guys, that's going to do it for the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to hit the like button as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you really found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.